Good morning, everybody, or should I say evening. It's me and my adventurous sidekick Madeline here, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to turn our attention to American history, in particular the Mexican-American War. And since it can be kind of contentious to speak of one's own country, I do want to reiterate that I love my country, I'm proud of it. Not necessarily proud of everything that's happened, but everywhere has things. I mean, imagine how a modern German feels. I'm sure they love their country. Anyways, from the beginning, the Mexican-American War, which occurs in, hold on one second here. Let me see. Anyways, and I also want to talk a little bit about, before we get into it, the entire reason I even have an interest in history is because these are all real people who lived through real events. And looking at our current times, especially like during the lockdowns, I realized that our country was way more divided than I thought it was growing up, right? And this is not the first time that it's happened. Myself today, I am apolitical, and you can quote me that I feel like both parties are corrupt. But this isn't the first time in American history that we've been divided. I mean, we went into a civil war in the 1860s, but just before that, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the United States' territory, extending its borders all the way to the Rockies. Before then, it had been confined to like the Mississippi area. To the southwest, Mexico had declared independence in 1821, and a large portion of them, including New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Texas, broke away in 1836, declaring themselves the Lone Star Republic. So a huge portion of Mexico comprised what is like Colorado and basically the American Southwest today, right? They declared themselves the Lone Star Republic. 9 years later, in 1845, the U.S. Congress admitted them to the Union. That was even controversial. There were people that were against annexing Texas. Personally, Austin wasn't my favorite city to knock on doors in, but I like having Texas. So even that was contentious or divisive back then. James Polk, the president at the time, ordered General Taylor to reposition his troops to the Rio Grande, challenging Mexico's claim to the land. They claimed that the traditional border was like 150 miles north. The Washington Union newspaper at the time reported the following: "Let the great measure of annexation be accomplished, and with it the questions of boundary and claims. A corpse of property, organized volunteers would invade, overrun, and occupy Mexico." So officials back then were way more open about calling for a war. I mean, I am old enough to remember post 9/11, and there was kind of a real call nationwide for the war on terror, but in general, I don't feel like it was as intense as that, right? Dropped my pen. Several months later, in 1845, during the summer, editor of the Democratic Review, John O'Sullivan, coined a term that would define this era: manifest destiny. I definitely remember that term from high school. And the first time it ever appeared was in that newspaper, the Democratic Review, where he said, "Our manifest destiny is overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions." The way they spoke back then, did they even understand it? Like, I don't know. In April of 1846, General Taylor's quartermaster, Colonel Cross, disappeared and was rediscovered 11 days later, presumably having been killed by Mexican forces. That was at least the story that appeared in the newspaper. The next day, a patrol unit of Taylor's was also ambushed and annihilated, leaving 16 dead, and the rest wounded or captured. Taylor requested 5,000 volunteers and told President Polk, quoting, "Hostilities may now be considered as commenced." So the invasion of Mexico had begun. A letter from one Colonel Hitchcock recalls an interesting feeling among the troops. Even among the troops, they weren't all for the war. Like, these are American troops, right? This is from Colonel Hitchcock. He left a letter. I have said from the first that the United States are the aggressors. It looks as if the government sent a small force on purpose to bring on a war, so as to have a pretext for taking California. My heart is not in this business, but as a military man, I am bound to execute orders. Hashtag following orders. Even before shots were fired, James Polk had been pressing his cabinet to issue a declaration of war. Though, his diary stated, up to this time, Maddie, up to this time, as we knew, we had heard of no open act of aggression by the Mexican military, but that the danger was imminent that such acts would be committed. I said that, in my opinion, we had ample cause of war, and that it was impossible I could remain silent much longer. Again, the way they communicated back then, it sounds more elegant, but the stuff they're doing is so much more depraved. A Democratic majority in the House shelved war documents on May 11th and quickly convened to declare war. So the U.S. House at the time voted 174 to 14 in favor of it. The Senate took 1 day to deliberate and then voted 40 to 2 in favor of it. Abraham Lincoln is finally coming into the picture. A real American hero, right? That's what we were all taught. I think he's cool. Generally, Abraham Lincoln was not in Congress when this declaration was made, but in 1846 he became famous for his so-called spot resolutions, when he asked President Polk to point to the exact spot where American blood had been shed. So the whole pretext of the Mexican-American War was that the Mexican army killed that unit I just mentioned earlier. So Abraham Lincoln goes into Congress after the war had become kind of unpopular, and he asked the president, so where exactly were these Americans killed? Bold. Lincoln remarked the following when speaking in support of General Taylor's presidential candidacy. Quote, the marching an army into the midst of a peaceful Mexican settlement, frightening the inhabitants away, leaving their growing crops and other property to destruction, to you may appear a perfectly amiable, peaceful, unprovoking procedure, but it does not appear so to us. Again, boldly equitable. Lincoln continued voting in favor of the war, though. Hey, so, strong words, but even Lincoln acted like a politician back then. But a handful of Whigs opposed the measures, including Joshua Giddings of Ohio, who said, in the murder of Mexicans upon their own soil, or in robbing them of their country, I can take no part, either now or hereafter. The guilt of these crimes must rest on others. I will take no part in them. But again, 2 senators voted against it, and 14 representatives. So pretty much all the powerful at the time were very in favor of it. Now, I'm not even saying that I was against the Mexican-American War, but at the time there was a lot of public demonstrations against it. But there were demonstrations in favor of it too, in New York, Baltimore, Indianapolis, Philadelphia. And the poet Walt Whitman captured the public's eagerness when he wrote, let our arms now be carried with the spirit which shall teach the world that while we are not a forward for a quarrel, America knows how to crush as well as expand. Yeah, there's almost like a public hysteria over this war. This is right when America starts to become kind of powerful as like a new country too. But again, we're only like 20 years before the Civil War emerges. So the Illinois State Register, the American Review, and the New York Herald, these are all newspapers, published articles supporting expansion. And the New York Journal of Commerce, brought into the situation. The supreme ruler, God was brought into the situation. So then we have people actually saying that God, the supreme ruler of the universe, seems to interpose and the energy of man towards befitting mankind. Its interposition seems to me to be identified with the success of our arms. So, and that's not uncommon throughout history. There have been, most armies actually, historically, have believed that God were on their side. Famously, the Mongols worshipped multiple pantheons because they wanted to make sure that they were playing all their cards, you know? Senator H.V. Johnson remarked, war has its evils. In all ages it has been the minister of wholesale death and appalling desolation. But, however inscrutable to us, it has also been made by the all-wise dispenser of events the instrumentality of accomplishing the great end of human accomplishment and civilization. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the opposition to the war. Generally, the abolitionists, like basically the anti-slavery movement, is the people who opposed the Mexican-American War. Ultimately, this will expand the United States almost up to its current present-day borders, because they will get all the way over to, we will accomplish manifest destiny. I've been to California before. It's beautiful. So I could see why our ancestors wanted that land. Not that it was right one way or the other. I don't know. It's hard to talk about history sometimes, but if there's one thing we can take from it, it has always been divisive, actually. Even in Rome. That's why we saw so many civil wars. And the succession of Beric's emperors. Power has never been peaceful. You can quote me on that too. Anyways, this week I am basically writing and getting ready. I'm going to be rejoining the traditional workforce here. And should be able to continue writing. Well, definitely can. But I think I'm going to buy a house here coming up in like the next month or two. And assuming that all goes well, which it should, I think I'm going to expand some of my content to like home improvement, maybe even investment advice. We'll see where things go from here. But I'm feeling pretty good. In total, I traveled through Brazil and like 24 states or something like that this summer. And I am ready to lead and, move forward. Anyways, this is a wandering author, here to remind you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. What are you guys doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local communities today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part. You can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, I love y'all.